Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that my book, Drummers on Drumming, is available now on Amazon as both a paperback and an ebook. Based on the Big Fat 5 segment of this podcast, where I sit down with my favorite drummers to discuss the 5 records and stories that shaped their approach to the instrument, this book is packed with insights from the drummers who redefined how we think about the modern drum set. You can grab your copy now by checking the link in this episode's show notes or simply searching Drummers on Drumming on Amazon. So thank you for all the support, and now let's get into the show. What is up? Welcome back to Big Fat 5, a podcast financially supported by Big Fat Snare Drum. Alrighty, so I'm going to say this all again in case you only wanted to listen to part 2 of my discussion with Dan Bailey. But as I've talked about in the show before, I did do about 30 to 40 episodes of a podcast that eventually morphed into the show you know and love today. But they were a little more general discussions of drum topics that I felt didn't quite contain the focus for a kind of show I wanted to produce. So because of that, I decided to archive the first batch of shows. And while you can't find them on this feed anymore, they are still available at bigfatsnaredrum.com under the podcast tab. Just click archived episodes. All right, so this is part 2 of a chat I had with Dan Bailey. Dan is the current drummer and musical director for Father John Misty, but he's also a prolific session drummer based out of his own studio in Southern California. You can follow him on Instagram, and I'll put that link in the show notes. But he also has a handful of very useful online courses known as the Bailey Method. He covers everything from tuning to recording to engineering with a very boots-on-the-ground approach. And I've learned a lot from them, and they're great. I promise I'm not just saying that. Anyways, this chat took place at Dan's old studio just a bit outside of LA, and it was my last in-person interview before the world decided to change. So, all right, here we go. Here are Dan's earned perspectives on the 5 things to avoid in a session when you're the one engineering drums. Number 1, avoid having gear that's in disrepair, which seems obvious, but I'm sure, there's a lot of nuances in that.
Yeah, and that's both on the drum end of it, if you were in the Tour de France, you wouldn't show up with like a bike that wasn't ready to go,
Yeah.
So you've got your old, Slingerland kit or whatever, and you have a screw that's rattly in the floor tom. It's like that, there's nothing you can do until you fix that. Old hardware where the nylon sleeves have worn out so they rattle, just like things that people don't, it's like buying drum cases. It's not fun. Yeah. But it's like having a bass drum pedal that doesn't make noise is kind of a big deal, type of thing. And usually it's just about maintenance and throw some WD-40 on the spring and you're all good to go.
Yeah.
And then obviously things like, I have my spot and drums stay mic'd all the time, but like I'll come in every 23rd day and the floor tom, like the XLR and the floor tom mic will just be making a noise because it just went bad when it didn't move overnight.
Sure, yeah.
But it's just like, oh, that cable went bad. Okay. So it's just knowing that like, oh, this mic has the power supply is making a noise. I need to check into that. Or just like, just being prepared and not having stuff that you're going to have to fix rather than work on music.
Yeah.
Pretty common sense. Whatever that may be, it could be on your, on the technical end, could be the instrument,
sure.
Whatever that happens to be.
Yeah, I remember, I forget the actual session, but my bass drum was squeaky, and the guy, the engineer over the talkback said something about it. And I remember I was joking. I was like, well, hey, Led Zeppelin, the famous squeak. And he like paused. He's like, yeah, anyways, can you get rid of the squeak? You're right, sir.
That was John Bonham, and that was Physical Graffiti.
Exactly, yeah.
That may not be what we're doing here today. So.
Yeah, hey, Ben, why don't we...
Ben, you realize you just compared yourself to John Bonham there?
Yeah, we're all laughing in here. You can't hear it, but let's just...
Yeah, we have to talk back off, so...
Exactly.
That's the worst when you hear...
Oh, but yeah, the talkback song.
Oh, I'm always terrified of... Or if you're in the control room and someone else is tracking stuff, you're just like... I'm just so paranoid of like looking where... the engineers, whether it's on a foot switch or a hand switch, are just like, because I'm gonna make this joke and it's my buddy playing bass, but I don't want him to get out of his rhythm. Me and an engineer buddy of mine we try to see the best double negatives we can come up with, where it's like, man, Jake is such a good bass player, or such a bad bass player. Good thing he's always late. So we'll just be riffing on those while some dude is like punching a bass part or something, and it just like, there's been times it's like, oh, he probably heard the last 5 words out of context.
It's always nice to see that they heard it, but they never bring it up. You're like, dude, you weren't going to ask us about that? You're just going to be sad about it? Like, come on, man. In the Bailey Method, you talk about sometimes there's like an old crappy head that looks like crap, but
just if it sounds good,
it gets changed. It's like you're like,
yeah. I have 3 or 4 drums in here that are like either the head that I received with how many years ago or whatever, or just something that I like stumbled across, and I'll even like Sharpie on it, like don't change until you have to, just totally. Like just to remind myself that like it's set up for a very specific thing, and it's the luxury of having. I mean, that's the bad part of the gear in disrepair is like the more gear you get, the more you have to take care of, because you'll go like, maybe I've been on a tour, so I've been using like a modern road kit for a bit, and I know, like I get home and 3 days later I have a session and I want to use my Ludwig kit, but I haven't played those in 2 months because I've been gone, and it never fails like, oh, the heads weren't in as good a shape as I thought, or like there's something to be said about if drums just have those, like every now and then you find a magic spot, and it's like if it finds something it really where it wants to be, just like if it's right, it's right,
Do you have any like broken cymbals or anything that you're like, I'm so stoked they're broken?
In particular, have one 20-inch AGOP ohm crash that has like a 5-inch crack around the bell.
Okay.
Because those, I was playing one live for a little bit, and you play a dark cymbal live, you tend to hit it pretty.
Yeah,
so, you try to get something out of it, which means you're probably breaking them, so it's not ideal.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, when you hear it with your ear, it sounds terrible. It's the level of broken to where it has the like weird rattle. It doesn't decay even. It's like it's terrible sounding. But for whatever reason, like if I'm playing anything that has any kind of like electronic element.
Oh,
something
totally.
about it, like in the room mics, it sounds like some crazy sample that, like, it sounds like a weird pitch down 808 crash or something like that.
Absolutely.
And it has a thing that a regular, like, it was not designed to do that, but it just how mics hear it. It's just a weird thing. And so, like, AGOP, I could swap it for a fresh one, but
sure.
like I'm just gonna play it till I can't play it anymore, and then
The keyword's disrepair, because what you just described, yes. I don't think is something that needs to be... broken doesn't mean in disrepair.
No, it's functional. It's usable. Yeah. No, it's more like if you have a snare drum with like 3 of the snare strands have broken and are flopping around on the bottom, that's disrepair. That's just like you can't record that drum because you're just going to get weird rattles and like overtones because the drum's out of balance. And
yes.
Yeah.
100%.
That would be a disrepair.
Yeah. All right, number 2. So, I wanted you to embellish on this thing. Trying things you haven't on a session.
Yes, yeah.
Are you referring to playing or...
Mostly engineering. I mean, also playing, for sure. Like, I would, the only... playing-wise, the only thing that would have any application for me is if I got, like I just got called recently, I played on kind of a ska record that had some like punk sensibility, and I didn't grow, like I missed that. I just was never in a garage punk band, and I kind of wish I was at some point. But those tunes where you have to play the do for like that's the verse part, and it's just like I need to spend a day and like, because it's not. I mean, it's things like that are a little bit of a parlor trick. It's just like a blast beat is just like a thing you can teach yourself to do, like. The double pickup kick in the punk beat is just, you're just dropping your foot. And it's just like, it looks like more than it is, it sounds like more than it is, it's not that difficult. But like, I'm not going to walk into a session where that's not a music I ever play. And just like, now I'm going to immediately know the vocabulary. I listen to the freaking Specials and Save Ferris and just a bunch of like rando ska stuff. Yeah. And just like, what's genre specific, just like, and just which version of it are we talking about? Like, we talking about like 70s ska, we talking about like mighty mighty boss tones, like pop ska, we talk, like, but it's spending time with that. I mean, that would be a time that preparation is necessary, because like I don't know that, so I wouldn't walk in and try to play something that I haven't ever done in my life on a set, like when money's on the line. That's just not fair to them. I'm not making myself look great.
Sure.
But mainly, I mean, so obviously the playing part, mainly I mean engineering in this case. Like, now it's one thing to like, you set up the drums and you just put a mic down and it happens to sound great where it is. That's, if you stumble across on something, rad. But to go in and go like, man, I'm going to try this new way to do a kick out and kick in, and I'm going to try it today on this set. It's like, do that on a day when no client is there, or no one's waiting for you. And like, and you'll immediately go, oh, this sounds great. Now I know I have another trick to like go to if I need to. Yeah. But also, if it sounds bad, I didn't waste anybody's time or money. Like, yes. So I would say like, sometimes weird things are, oh man, what if we reamped the drums on this song? Like put a 58 and then run it through like a Fender Twin and then mic that or something. You know, it's like,
sure.
Cool. You should probably learn how to do that first. You
should
probably practice doing that so you don't spend all day figuring out how to do it. You know, it's just that I try to like not reach for things I don't have confidence in that they're going to work. Like, is it a question when someone is having you send them drum tracks, like how many stems do you want? Like, or do they just say we want this vibe and you're like, okay, this is going to be a 3 mic setup? So I go 12 most times, even if I know sometimes that they're making choices. Like I have a stereo room pair and I have a mono room that'll be, maybe the stereo rooms will be really far and the mono, they'll be 12 feet and the mono room will be 4 feet. And that's just to get different vibes. Usually they're going to pick one of those. They're not going to use both. So even if they go like, yeah, man, I think this could just be kick, snare, overheads. If you have a multi-mic setup, you should send them everything just because it gives them options. They can always mute it or not import it into their session. But like having the options, that like maybe the tune, they start tracking other instruments and now the drums like don't have the size they needed. Now they'll bring up the bigger room mics or something.
Sure.
So like, yeah, I just go. And in the classes I walk through it, but I just usually record 12 channels, just kick in, kick out, snare top and bottom, pair of toms, pair of overheads, pair of rooms, mono room, hi-hat, if I named those correctly. But but that's just like the basics. You got the close mics, you got some options for rooms, that's all you're ever gonna
Would you ever do like say what you just said and then also set up like a Glenn Johns and then just be like, this is all the stems, only solo these 3 mics for this.
Sure. And I would say that most of the time you end up having a conversation with whoever's producing, and usually if you're doing a remote track, they're usually engineering too.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey man, are you going to like lean on the rooms? Because then I'll treat them different. If the room mic is going to be the thing, I'm going to spend my most time getting that to sound cool.
Yeah.
And then the close mics will take care of themselves. Whereas like, if it's going to be super close mic heavy, then like I'm still going to, even if it's like a Tame Impala thing, there's no room mics, I'm still going to send them because who knows, they want to affect them and like low pass them and bring them in underneath everything.
Yeah, totally.
Who knows what a mix engineer is going to do. So giving them the options to do it is cool. Even if they might use the friggin' kick and the mono mic. That might be the take,
Yeah.
But they're going to be stoked they have a full range of stuff, even if they only use a couple things in it. For
like
sure.
an engineer's going to say, don't send the Coles. I don't think we need that.
No,
yeah, please.
Like, I'll take those if you got them. Yeah,
exactly.
I'll do something with them. Those guys usually like to have options. Yeah,
totally.
Sure.
Yeah. Number 3, don't force a drum, microphone, or any piece of gear onto a song, which is, I've definitely done that.
Yeah.
Probably still do.
I find myself...
or on a tour, too, yeah.
Never fails. You get a new piece of gear, you get a new ride, you get a new snare drum, whatever, you get a new drum kit, you automatically, or engineering, you get a new mic pre or something. I guess that's a little... If you get like if you buy a Neve 1073 for your snare, that's going to work from day one. You don't need to...
Yeah.
But like, I'm more talking about like, man, I just finally broke down and bought like a Tama bell brass, like something I've never had, not usually my thing, but then I go to the singer-songwriter session, like, man, I just got this bell brass studio monster. I'm going to use it on this track. And it's like, well, we're playing Hot Rods, man. So this is not, like, this is a brushes track, so that may not be that vibe.
Sure.
But like, and in a younger day, I would be like, no, that's the sound I have in my head. Let's try to make it work.
Yep.
And inevitably, it's just like, just toss a freaking Acrolite up there. Like, just be done with it. Like,
it's not in my bank account. It's going to be on the track.
Yeah, it's like, the things that work are the things that work. And like, really, it's just like, if you're recording, your band's recording their record on Saturday and you went to friggin' Chicago Music Exchange and bought a drum on Friday night, like, that drum may totally rule, but also like go in with the open-mindedness of like, it may not sound the way you think it does, and don't try to force it to make it happen. Well, and so much is like we were talking a little bit before about how I don't have a particularly heavy foot. Like, certain people lend themselves to certain drums. Like, I know about myself, I don't hit a snare drum hard enough to really activate a bell brass. I just don't. Even when I'm playing rim shots, I'm just not... I don't have the horsepower to really activate a freaking 30-pound drum shell. but like whereas that. You see like Josh Freese or like Dave Elitch or any of those Matt Cameron play, I mean, it's just like, it's like, oh, those dudes are strong as hell, and like, those dudes are playing the drums. Like, all right,
yes,
and like, and when they play, it just, a lot of it is, it's not even just the drum, because if somebody goes and buys a friggin' Lead Reliance or whatever from the 30s, that drum's probably going to sound really cool. It's just like, does that drum sound cool when you play it? Is that like, for me, I know a bell brass doesn't sound cool when I play it. Like, it sounds all thin and a little small, but then like somebody else might sit down at the same drum and it sounds amazing. And it's just like,
that's, yeah.
So hence just just stick to the gear, like even if you've gone like, man, you know what I really like one of the new 14x6.5 acrylites. I want to get one because that's a sound I like and I know I'm going to get to use it. It's one thing for that. It's like when you're buying something sight unseen that doesn't have like a universal reputation, like it may or may not work the way you think it does. And so like forcing, it's just a square peg round hole situation.
Yeah.
Just like, sometimes it's just, man, I know the old Ludwig kit's just going to work. I'm not going to try to get the new modern kit on this because it's just not, we're going to spend time messing with it when the 3-ply kit would have immediately just been it. One of the better examples is the Ochiltree's, when he's talking about how he set up Bonham's kit. It's on YouTube.
Okay.
And they have like a 1973 green sparkle, 14, 16, 18, all the sizes. Yeah. And he goes like, here's when I was tour teching for Led Zeppelin, here's how I set up this kit. And they have a kid play it at the end. And I mean, it definitely sounds like John Bonham, but it sounds like a dude doing John Bonham. And it's not even that the playing is incredible. He just doesn't have the physicality of that guy. Like it's just, he's a different, he probably doesn't have the same frame. He's probably not playing the same size stick. It's just like there's so many.
Probably not 4 double vodka sodas in.
Maybe that could be some of that. There's just different. We're all different, and so like that. I mean, I talk about it in the second class a bunch. Is that like magical thinking of like, man, as soon as I get this instrument, then I'm going to have that sound all the. It's like for a great example is Matt Chamberlain's snare drum on One Headlight, the Wallflowers record, which I've heard on pretty good authority is a 14 by 375 Noble and Cooley, solid maple with the die-cast hoops.
That sounds familiar.
Because that sounds like, and in my head, that's what that kind of sounds like. Yeah. I had always thought it was a little more like nickel over brassish, like old 20s.
Yeah.
And so like I had that, I bought that the Noble and Cooley drum, and it's the Phil Collins snare drum. He loves that Noble and Cooley piccolo. It rules.
Okay, yeah.
But like it never sounded like the thing I wanted. I wanted it to sound like One Headlight, and it doesn't. But to me, the way I hit a drum, a 20 nickel over brass does sound like that. Mm-hmm. So it's not even that like you can get the same model drum that was on a track, but if it doesn't kind of interface with the way you play it the same, it's not going to sound the same. And something else might sound dead ringer for that, and you don't know until you find it. And that's why you experiment with your stuff and practice and all that stuff.
Gosh, having a room like this would be drummer's dream.
It's pretty great to have like a combo storage unit / recording space just to be able to like have everything here. If I go to a session, I'm probably going to have to pick a kit, maybe 2 kits, a couple of snare drums, a bag of cymbals, Whereas like if I do stuff here, it's like, oh man, it'd be great, that specific snare drum that I probably wouldn't have picked as one of the 4 or 5 I'm going to take.
Yeah.
But for this track, that's set up to do the exact thing we want. And being able to be in your own space, you have everything that you own kind of in one spot is pretty great.
What would you say is your percentage of nowadays traveling to sessions and doing them here remotely?
Oh, I do 90% of my stuff here.
That's so nice.
So it's just because I think when you think about it, especially if it's for somebody's like first EP, or if it's especially for a TV thing where budgets are kind of thin, it's like if you think about it, if you're going to any kind of real studio in Los Angeles, you've got to pay for the studio, you got to pay for the engineer, you got to pay for the players, you got to pay, I mean you have so many mouths to feed.
Yeah.
Whereas like if it's just about me knocking you out a 90-second track that sounds like Foo Fighters, it's like you're not my rate is a flat rate, so you're not paying for studio separate, you're not paying me separate as an engineer and a player. Yeah. You're like, I mean, financially it just makes a ton of sense. The bummer is, I mean, engineers are the ones that are getting squeezed out is the bummer. And so anytime I get to work on a session with an engineer and I'm not engineering, I'm just like trying to soak up all their little, you're like, man, what mic placements have I seen? Whatever.
Hey, the market's the market. I mean,
totally. And just like, we all, and I'm sure the engineers are like, oh man, he tuned his floor tom a certain way and that was cool. And I'm going to remember that for, whatever. We're all learning stuff from each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say that like just the way workflow is now, it's so common. I mean, the big studios are hurting because we either do it in drums in places like this, or the producer has their own studio and has a drum kit and they do it at their their detached garage or their basement or whatever, and it sounds freaking great. Like the amount of albums being done in basements in Nashville that sound unbelievable is just out of control because the gear is so good and people know what they're doing.
Absolutely.
It's not. I mean, having a great space is great, but like if the sound source is good, if your player and your instrument sounds good, you kind of can't mess it up. So.
What are your views on samples? And would you ever like not completely replacing, but enforcing certain?
Yeah, I look at it like I honestly look at samples a lot of the same way I look at like the big fat snare drum itself, like the thing. It's a tool.
Yeah,
it's like anytime I get bummed out when I see people from like default putting a big fat snare drum on their snare drum all the time.
Sure.
It's like, no, that's a sound and it's a great sound, and it's to differentiate from other sounds. It's like it matters
100%.
when like that big beefy sound sounds cooler when before it had this big wide open sound. Samples are a tool. Like look, if I'm playing, if I played on something and they're going like, yeah, this is going to be like Billie Eilish and we just want like some live drum elements in there, I know my kick and snare are going to get replaced.
Yeah.
Like, and knowing that going in, I'll even engineer them different. I'll make them really dead so that they're not hanging out over the samples and stuff. But it honestly doesn't bug me at all. It's just it's a tool. Now, when samples are being used because your kick in is terrible sounding, that's a bummer. Like when it's being used as a fix, like a big fat snare drum being used because otherwise the snare isn't sounding like a snare drum, that's a bummer because you're using it as a Band-Aid. So that would be, I know if you're going to be playing on something that's like big and modern, there's probably going to be a snare sample on it just because that's the way of the world.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine because that's appropriate to the kind of music you're playing.
Yeah.
Now, if you're playing on like what should sound like some really tight 3-mic drums and you're like you're laying samples on that, that's like, well, that seems like that's a Band-Aid. That's not a,
Sure.
Look, the state of songs, usually when we're playing drums on them, it's 9 times out of 10, it's like there's a scratch acoustic. There might be like a bass track on it. Like they might have had some programmed drums, and there might be like super sparse piano. There's just, usually it's like vocal and whatever the like core rhythm instrument and nothing else. So it's like, why am I going to make the track all about the drums? I have to leave the assumption that there's going to be freaking 30 other tracks on this. Like there's going to be, probably stereo rhythm, rhythm acoustic tracks. There's probably stereo rhythm electric tracks. There's probably a main electric part. There's probably stereo keys. Like there's so much taking up real estate that like you just have to kind of have the goal in the back of your head. Like, what is this going to sound like eventually? And the more you do it, the more you start to hear it and go like, oh, this way I'm treating the drums is cool when it's just drums. As soon as other stuff, they're going to get lost. Like they're too open. Like when you have like, if you have really wide open drums and you're going for really natural, the track better be built around that drum sound. Yeah. Because those drums don't play well with other things. Yeah. Whereas like if it's going to be a loop going on, there's going to be some other stuff, then like, oh, maybe I'm going to go tight drums because it plays, you can stack stuff on it. So basically all that is to say is just don't be so concerned with the drums as a finished product at the top. Like just learn what good raw sounds sound like and trust that they'll sound good at the end, I mean, by the fourth or fifth thing you've played on, you'll start to be like, oh, okay, so it sounds like this at this state, and then it gets to here, it's still like semi-mixed, and so these are like the reference mixes that they're sending people home with to check out. Like these are like kind of faders up, nothing's really treated.
Exactly.
So like it's going to sound a certain way, and then it's going to go to mix, it's going to get a little more manicured. Like there's but you just learn like, here's a fundamentally good kick sound, and that's going to be great. Like here's what a good snare drum sounds like when you bring the fader up. Awesome. And I know they can do with what they want. But I mean it's tough to listen to the end, especially with like a bad scratch track, because they're thinking like, this is all throwaway anyway. We're just knocking one out to whatever. But it can be. I do find it's more inspiring to play on songs that are more built out. For
100%, 100%.
And they're easier just because you kind of have a better idea of how much real estate the drums are left,
Yep.
Because a lot of times now it'll be like a pretty fully built out Logic or Ableton session or something that'll have some like marker drums that will then mute and then play. And then I imagine a lot of time, if they can get away with it, they're going to keep all the rhythm tracks they can. Usually you have to recut bass kind of in general. But But if the guitars are still locked and you can play to those, then it saves them time and stuff. But I just when it's really sparse at the beginning, it's just remember to not make it all about the drums for sure. Because it's so easy to do. It's such a common thing,
Yeah. Okay, so number 5, know to not give people too much, too many options, too many takes, too many.
Yeah. This is specifically because obviously if you're in a room, if you're at a studio, the producer's going to know when they're good, you know. But this is like it can be tough because there's obviously physical and literal distance between you and the people you're doing remotes for usually. Yeah. So it's like, I like to go, hey, like, so I'm going to work on this Thursday at 2. Like, that's going to be my window. And so I'm going to be working on this probably from like 2 to 6. If you can be available, Pacific time or whatever. Yeah. If you can be available, because I'm going to like send you a bounce and make sure we're on the right direction. I'm going to check in with you. Sure. And you might go like, that's great. Hey, that second verse is not kind of the thing I wanted. Like, I need feedback to know where to go. Yeah. And so having, feedback from your client in real time is pretty important. But also not giving them too much is when originally I would like, because there are times where people will be like, yeah, man, you know what this is, or like, do whatever you want, and I'll give them 3 takes, and they're like, that was great, whatever. Yeah. The ones that are hard to mess up,
Yeah.
And then the ones that are a little more specific, or they have specific parts or sounds or something. I mean, I may end up doing 9 or 10 takes, or more. I know for some of the Misty stuff we've cut here, I've done way more than that. But just knowing so you're getting closer. Take 10 should be closer to the desired result than take 1.
Yeah.
So you don't have to send them take 1 unless they specifically go, hey, there was something in drum, reference bounce 1 that was really cool. If they specifically like something, I'll send it to them.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if you did 10 takes, I just send them 8, 9, and 10. Because they don't need to be digging. First of all, it gives you a way to kind of take some control over how much they can comp you. Mm-hmm. Because I've been the victim of some terrible comps where I've gotten a record back, and this is way before I started doing remotes, but just in general, I've just gotten something back and been full on kind of embarrassed that it has my name on it, just because it's been so turned around from what I actually played.
Have you ever done that?
I have been asked to have been uncredited a couple times. Yeah, because there were just things that and it wasn't even I was never mad. It was just
there's a few times I wish I would have.
Yeah. I don't know that that's quite a good example of what it is I do. I mean, we're talking twice. And one of them was I had some pretty significant belief differences with one of the artists.
Oh, okay.
And the session kind of went a weird place because of that. It's the only time it's ever happened.
Sure.
But that was one that was the record came out pretty good and stuff, and they ended up liking the drums and stuff. But it was one of those just because I wasn't on board with the direction of his whole thing.
Sure.
So it was just man, I'm happy to play drums on it, but I don't know that. Do you mind if I? And no one ever.
It's all about how you approach it.
Well, and no one looks at everything.
Yeah.
And we're all half the time we're just doing stuff for hire. Everyone knows it doesn't reflect on us. So I'm going to do the best I know how to do on a tune that maybe I think is really great or could be better, but I'm just going to do the best I know how, and it always turns out cooler than I think it will.
It always does,
because they have a better idea than what I do for what their music should be, and
and it's it did turn out well. It means no one's going to hear it probably, and it's fine. It's kind of it'll work itself out.
Oh, the old all the good records have no budget, and all the bad ones have all the budget.
Yeah,
since the beginning of time.
Yeah. So I want to get this on both the episodes. Yeah. Where can people find you? And I definitely want you to give a little shout out to your instructional course.
Sure. So you can find me at Instagram.com /DRichardBailey or at drichardbailey.com. And through there you can find links to Vimeo, where I've put up 2 classes now. One is specifically what we were talking about, showing up to a session with a kit that's ready to go. I take an old Camco apart because there really hasn't been... I couldn't find at least a place online with kind of actual tuning stuff in actual studio environments, people that kind of actually do it
in real time.
And this is not a knock to anybody else doing it. I just thought there was a thing that I thought that would be beneficial in real time, so that because if somebody goes, here's how you tune a rack tom, flash forward to it being done, I don't know how long it took. Because I think the indication of how long something takes to do for someone who does it all the time is a pretty good indicator of how close you're getting to having a real grasp on it.
Yeah.
If you see me tuning, a rack tom, and I think that segment from, setup and everything is 20 something minutes.
Yeah.
You know that this should take me, I'm going to, if you're if the edges have a rough spot and you're going to sand them down a little bit, if you're going to Vaseline the edges, all stuff that I talk about, normal drum tech stuff.
Yeah.
If you're going to do that stuff, it's it's going to take 15 minutes to do that to that drum. So if it's taking you 30, you're gone wrong. Mm-hmm. And if it took you 3, there's something you missed. I think the time frame is actually a pretty important part of that. So class 1 is just intros to basic mic placement, how I set up a kit, how I rehead it, how I maintain an older drum kit, because they'll have the little quirks and stuff. And then just putting those drums as we just tune them up on mics, and I give you my my engineering settings. Mm-hmm. So I'm not hiding anything, and it's just here's what, if you set up a drum this way, a microphone's going to hear it this way.
Yeah.
And so it's just a real a good way for hopefully people to realize when they're recording their own sounds, oh yeah, that kick in sounds kind of like mine. That means I'm in, and I like that. That means I'm getting there.
Yeah.
And then class 2 goes into more specific about hey, if I'm going for this kind of approach, if they go hey, we want Tame Impala drums. What does that mean? It's because it's not just a tuning thing; it's an engineering thing. And I may have to change how my space is orientated. Might have to put up some more blankets and deaden some stuff, and just all the extra stuff that's not just basically putting a mic on the drum. in that we talk about like a couple different mic placements I like to use on close mics and like how I measure overheads, all kinds of stuff. But just like the basics. One is the basics of how to set up and like have a functional kit ready to go and what you can expect when you get to the studio.
Yeah.
And two is more like, okay, now they want this snare sound. How am I going to go about having the tools I need to make my drums more the way they want,
Cool.
Yeah, man.
Well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.
And that's the show. If you're listening on a platform that allows ratings and reviews, do that. It helps more people find the show, so it'll get bigger and better, and hopefully I'll have a chance to sell out one day. But you'll be an OG listener that can brag to all your friends. Anyways, why don't you go and check us out at bigfatsnaredrum.com and follow us on all the socials. Just search for Big Fat Snare Drum, and you will find us. The show is edited in part using Isotope RX Audio Editor. It's amazing, so go check that out at isotope.com. And thanks again to Gunnar Olsen for the theme music. Bye!